and thank you for joining our webinar on legalizing housing abundance in California. And I will give Nolan credit for that title as well. I will start us off just introducing both of our speakers today. We have Teri Mufic. She has spent decades working in new business development, marketing, and product management for companies like Weyerhaeuser and Hallmark. But when her family moved from Kansas City to Los Angeles in 2012, her priorities shifted. A talk featuring the story of how LWVC helped execute the state's new districting plan helped her inspire her to join the league in 2017. So since then, she has helped her local, county, and state leagues on housing and homelessness projects, having firsthand experience with managing a breakfast ministry that served the unhoused and working poor for 5+ years. Teri currently serves as the chair of LWVC's Housing and Homelessness Interest Group and leads its legislative team. So thank you, Teri, so much for joining us. I'll also introduce Nolan. Most of you also are probably familiar with Teri. She does some great work here at the league. So a shout out for Teri. And our other speaker this evening will be Nolan Gray. He's the research director for California YIMBY and an expert in urban land use regulation. He's the author of Arbitrary Lines, How Zoning Broke the American City and How to Fix It, which I've also just added to my reading list, Nolan. Gray previously worked as a planner in New York City, where he worked on the front lines of zoning. He is a widely published author with work appearing in outlets such as The Atlantic, Bloomberg City Lab, and The Guardian. He lives in LA and is originally from Lexington, Kentucky. We will get us started with Teri.
All right. Hi, everyone. Let me give me a moment to share my screen here and get us all set up. Hope you are getting ready for a wonderful weekend. Does this look okay, Adriana? I need to go into slideshow.
Oh yeah, it'll be the little one at the bottom, to the left of your zoom in and zoom out. That kind of looks like an old school presenter screen.
I'm on the wrong page. Hold on.
No worries. Yeah, at the very bottom, we're kind of resuming.
Okay. There we go. Perfect. All right, let's get started. I do like Nolan's title of Legalizing Housing Abundance in California because and I have to laugh because most of the time when I have brought this up, trying to get people to come to this presentation, they are kind of taken aback by it. And it's kind of like when you are giving a presentation or coming in to talk to a city council or even, your local league and saying, we've got this housing development coming up. And that is the fastest way to get people to appear at a meeting, because more than likely than not, they are going to be there protesting us not we don't want that new housing. That seems to be everyone's go-to. And we are here to talk about kind of why we need this. So let me set the stage a little bit. Since 2016, the two governors we've had have signed more than 100 housing bills into law. And why do we have so many bills around housing? It's because we need 2.5 million more homes. Now you're going to see numbers from 3.5 million down to, maybe 1 million, but that is what the number that HCD uses. And they would like these homes by 2031. Their goals are to keep people in their homes, to produce more affordable, climate-smart housing, and they want to try to attack homelessness. But you know as well as I do that there are just a plethora of hurdles in getting that kind of amount of housing developed, from the local permitting, because every city has their own zoning barriers and they've got their own kind of vision for their city, that they want to keep their neighborhoods the way they are. The neighbors don't want to change. You've got like construction costs that are going out of the roof, especially after COVID, and we don't have enough funding for this. And then you layer on top of that all the economic complexities that we have, from inflation to wages and interest rates. So it's just a great place to be right now, right? So we talk about homes in general, but the HCD's, California's Housing and Community Development Department, has a plan called A Home for Every Californian. And this is the breakout. We need about 1 million low income types of housing to be built in this time period by 2031. Oops. And why does this keep doing that? If you look at where we have been, if you look back from 1983 and the mid 80s, we had a lot of homes being built. And then all of a sudden things started to slow down. So this chart brings us almost up to date. It brings us through 2022. And if you look at it, we have just slowed down production, not that we don't need the homes, but because of the cost of land and people being incented to come and actually start other buildings. And lots of people, they want to keep their housing costs high if they were to sell it. So we just have everything from the blue is the actual units. We have what you guys have probably heard about, the Kinski study that said that we need, I think, 3.5 million homes built by 2030. And then we've got what HCD has projected here, and then what the budget projects in 2023, that was last year, of where we needed homes. And we are falling short. We are barely building over 100,000 homes annually. And part of that is because of labor and the costs, and just it's so difficult to build here. There's also this other small problem that because we don't have enough housing, we have a lot of homelessness, and that just keeps growing. And I think one of the things that when you hear about the number of homeless people and all the money that goes to support the homeless, we tend to think of that as a very stagnant number, this 181,000 unhoused individuals that we have on our streets. We have 49% of all unsheltered individuals in California, and 28% of all people who are homeless here. And that number rotates. It could be that we actually house 25,000 people, but 35,000 fall into homelessness. And I think that's really important to remember, because there has been a lot of success in some other states, notably Texas, especially in Houston, where we have seen that it's just handled their homeless situation great, but they have far fewer building regulations than what we have in California. And on top of that, their total amount was 27,000 compared to our number. So it's easier to be able to house that number of folks. They may not have as many people falling into homelessness because they are able to build more housing, whereas we are way behind the 8 ball on this. Housing ends homelessness. We've got to turn off that spigot. We've got to figure out a way to stop people falling into homelessness. But that's a whole other presentation, so I will wait on that. So as people from League, we often wonder, how can we help? I had the experience, I think it was last week, in a board meeting where one of our members said, well, this other issue is about housing and we can't do anything about housing. And I beg to differ, because there's a lot that we can do to support housing being built in our neighborhoods and in our cities. And part of it is having the courage to do that, because when you have lots of opposition, it's very easy to kind of stand in the background and not want to ruffle feathers. The first thing that we need to do is educate our members about everything around housing, and how it is in your specific neighborhood if you're a local league. We have lots of ways to be able to do that, and lots of resources, starting with the interest group. And then to actively support housing, we have our housing and homelessness position, and we'll get into that just briefly, but there are lots of position points for you to be able to talk to city councils and write letters, so being pro-housing. Because right now, the loudest people in the room are the ones who are saying no. And it doesn't give any of our elected officials, they're listening to them. We have to also come out and say, yes, we are going to support having housing built. And it may change a little bit of the structure, but it's going to hopefully make our cities more equitable and bring about some really good things as well. Our position in brief, if you look at it, we are all about DEI and equal opportunity in housing. We support having a state program, a state plan that supplies safe, decent, and adequate housing for all Californians. Not everyone's going to live in a mansion, but they need to at least have a roof over their head. And we support all levels of government in the provision of affordable housing for all Californians. So that means from federal down to our city level, getting grants, any of those. So if we break down our position a little bit more clearly, we can understand, and we've seen all the redlining, and I think Nolan will touch on this later, but this equal opportunity piece of integrating just a mix of incomes as well as different nationalities and personalities inside of our cities to enrich them. We also advocate for, it's not just housing for housing's sake. We also have to have good land use policies and transportation. So hopefully we will cut down climate change issues that come up and preserve our natural resources. And we address the basic human needs of the people who are really struggling to get by. The state, we believe that they should give financial assistance, and that there should be standardization and modernization of local and building zoning codes, which right now everyone has their own different slice of the pie and piece of the cake, and we're all over the board, and that's what makes it very difficult sometimes for things to get built. This can be seen in manufactured housing. With so many different types of zoning and restrictions, it's very hard for them to be able to create one or two types of manufactured home that could go many places that would be much more economical for people to live in. We want to protect both the landlords and the tenants with some of the new housing or the legislation that's coming down. But we also, and I think number 6 is very important, because we want to remove those barriers that inhibit the construction of low and moderate income housing. And I think when most people think about low income housing, we're thinking of the slums of Watts, of how they used to be. And many of these people are working full-time jobs, but housing is so expensive that they are in low, very low housing if they can get it. There is not much around. And last but not least, the education of our communities around this topic, because affordable, which is 30% of income being spent on housing, people may not have that definition. That is kind of a government definition versus when you just see affordable written in the newspaper, it has different connotations for people. I wanted to point out Alfred Fu. They are just a fabulous housing activist. They are an architect, but they create this wonderful visualization of what could be. And they start every year with the legislation and divide it into different categories of all the bills that are coming up, so that we can see it visually, because it's very hard. It's overwhelming for us, as well as someone who doesn't know as much as we may about housing, about all the different bills and what kind of categories they're in, from homelessness to home ownership. I mean, it's a wide range, and I would I advocate for you to check out some of what Alfred has done. It will help explain things and help you keep track of things during the course of the legislative year. As the Housing and Homelessness Legislative Team looks at this, we have to look at the bills that are coming through as to what is going to make the biggest impact. Every year, we weigh in on about 7 bills. That doesn't mean we don't look at a lot more bills, but we have limitations on what league can support. And so we have to see what's going to make the biggest impact. And the way that we have looked at it are these foundational pillars for housing. Protection, preservation. Do we look at something that's sheltering, that's interim and temporary? There's the managing and the financing piece. Financing is huge, but what we usually come down to is production is what's going to make the biggest difference. How do we enable that production to keep going the way it needs to be? You know, how can we reduce the time from the when something gets permitted to when we get the shovel in the ground? Karen Bass, and Nolan's going to talk more about this, in LA, has done some pretty neat things in order to get that time down, and that is exciting some developers. So if you look at pro-production, and this is way oversimplified, but kind of divide that into 3 groups. There's streamlining, making things so that it's really quick to get through the system, and we get things, you know, started, and something really moving forward. Some of the hardest parts of that are when it comes to neighborhoods who may they do anything from bringing lawsuits to just protesting at city council, and it throws some hurdles in the way, along with other things that the city may have already have in place to slow down okays by planning commissions. Then you've got zoning overrides that they usually increase allowable density or reduce construction costs. And what we see a lot of is you can build this if you will give 10% to affordable or low-income housing. And I would like to see that percentage be higher, but at least it's moving production forward. And so while it's not ideal, and I think, I know Pasadena has had some luck at raising that to 20%, and there hasn't been an issue with it because it allows them to get started and start building faster. And then there are state planning mandates that come up. And I'm sure you've all heard about builder's remedy that has mysteriously appeared now that there are repercussions if cities do not comply with their housing element. They used to be able to get away with it. And because we're in the situation that we're in, where we're down a couple million homes, builder's remedy has come to the forefront again. And places like Santa Monica, I know, and Redondo Beach, there are a lot of cities that are dealing with what this is going to do to their city because they didn't comply with what they needed to for their RHNA goals. So, sorry about that. So all these complications that put more hurdles in the way, even though we've been, had all these 100 bills and we have made progress, we aren't even close yet to what needs to be built, because it's not just, it's just not the bills. You've got HCD and you've got the Department of Justice who weigh in on their requirements for what their departments want to have happen. You've got lots of lawsuits between city and state where state wants to enforce something and the city's saying, no, we're not going to do that, just like we do state and federal level. So litigiousness is just wonderful here right now. And officials are elected, and that really sways a lot of politicians because they want to get back in that seat. And so they don't necessarily do what may be best for a community. They're going to listen to their constituents and follow them. And that is hard to battle with. We see it, every city has that. there's the definition of quickly is a year, year and a half. Most building projects takes between 4 and 7 years to get completed, and that's not helping. Change is hard, and policy is flawed, and something bigger than I think than all of this is a couple of things that I have watched lately on YouTube talking about our housing policy and builders' remedies and the 15-minute city. People are assuming that things are like they used to be, or they want them to be like they used to be 20 or 30 years ago. But that is not possible anymore. We've got CEQA, people are extremely rent burdened, and salaries have not kept up. And then all of this factors in, and it makes the change very hard. So we have a lot of building to do. Once again, here's this breakout. At least 1 million. This is where previous RENA numbers used to be, down here at 1 million, and we've doubled it. And that was sticker shock for sure. But going back to this chart, if you look at where we need to be by 2030, and we've got, what, 6-7 years to do that, we need to be building up here almost at 300,000 homes a year, and we're not even halfway there yet. So those are the hurdles that we're coming up against, and that's why we keep going back to the bills that we have going through, because that's our best hope of making some changes. RENA is going to help us with this, I think, but it's still getting people on board. I've got when Adriana sends this out next week, I've got some references for you, some links so that you can see different articles and references here. But I'm going to let you go now and listen to what Nolan has to say, because hopefully it'll build on this.
Thank you so much, Teri. I really appreciate it. Seeing that league perspective was great. I will pass it on to Nolan to get us started on his section.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Adriana, for setting this up, and thank you, Teri, for those great comments. Let me get my screen shared here. And thanks to the league for having me. It's a real honor and privilege to be speaking to you all. Of course, we're very close. Our COO, Melissa Breach, former League of Women Voters California head. So it's a real pleasure to be chatting with you. I'm going to be talking about some of the same themes, but as somebody who's taught 18-year-olds, it's true of 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds, repetition is the key to learning. So let's dive right in. So where are we at in California with housing affordability? I'm old enough to remember when this run-up was considered an extreme generation-defining crisis. This is a map of home price index map of California. We are here. And you might be seeing headlines recently of, oh, markets are dipping down, housing markets are stabilizing. We're stabilizing after a period of extreme run-up in prices that have essentially priced a large and growing share of Californians out of homeownership altogether. This is a different way of presenting this information here. You can see California is deep purple to an extent almost not seen anywhere else in the country. California's coast.
Your
Sure.
slideshow isn't up.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
I think when I go full screen, it kicks it out. Let me try this again. Or let me try just going full screen. Can you just confirm that you see the slide okay?
Yes, we can see that
Okay.
fine. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so here's this map. This is a map of more recent data, fourth quarter of 2023. And you can see California is this extreme outlier. And just in case you all missed it, this was the map of the home price index. This is the housing crisis of the 2000s. This is where we are now. The discourse is now, oh, look, home prices are moderating. The problem's going away. Well, we have a lot of work left to do, I would say, on that. The same is true of rents. Rents are incredibly high. California, of course, has some of the highest rents in the country. And this is actually a map depicting rent burden, or the share of households that are spending more than a third of their income just on shelter, just on this one basic necessity on top of everything else that families have to pay for. And this is probably making it out pretty good. A large and growing share of California households are spending more than half of their income on rent. This is, of course, a completely untenable situation that's throwing a lot of people into homelessness. Because the rents are so incredibly high in California, if one thing goes wrong in your life, you're thrown into homelessness. And, of course, absolutely substance abuse problems, mental health issues are factors in the homelessness crisis, but a large share of folks experiencing homelessness don't deal with those issues, and are folks who might be working full-time, might be working part-time, might have had an apartment, but had one unexpected financial crisis. This is the invisible population of people experiencing homelessness who aren't sleeping in a tent or on a bench, but might be sleeping in a car, or might be sleeping on a couch or the floor of a loved one. This is a human crisis that affects more and more of us very directly. Partly as a result of this housing crisis, this is true of the US, but particularly places like California as well, we're making increasingly less progress on rectifying historic patterns of racial and socioeconomic segregation. So you can see here, we're making less and less progress on integrating our communities. And partly as a result of having pulled up the ladder on housing production, we're also making less progress on closing the racial wealth gap, which we know is mostly a function of variations in housing wealth. So if we're serious about rectifying historic patterns of injustice, we have to reckon with the housing shortage. Alternatively, many Californians are responding to the housing crisis by undertaking super commutes. This might sound good, but trust me, you do not want a super commute. These are people who are spending more than an hour sitting in traffic both ways. It's easy to talk in terms of numbers and abstract issues, but those are many thousands, hundreds of thousands of households who maybe have less time to spend with their children in the evening, or have less time to take night classes or evening classes or pursue their hobbies. The human cost of this, I think, is fairly dramatic. As a result of housing shortages, especially along the coast, more and more Californians have been forced to move to places that are at significant climate risk as a result. So we see more and more California housing having to be built in places that are at significant fire risk, inland, or in areas that face significant extreme heats, if not already today, in the years to come. It's a bit of a dark joke, but really, California's de facto affordable housing policy is move to Las Vegas. If you want an affordable home and you live in a place like Los Angeles, the answer for you is to leave your community behind and to move to a place that's incredibly climate resilient. I would say if we believe in building a California that's affordable, accessible, and equitable and sustainable, we have to reckon with housing. Partly as a result of these crises, California is for the first time losing population. Instead of responding to the housing crisis by doubling or tripling up or living in a car or undertaking a super commute, many hundreds of thousands of Californians have simply left the state. And, of course, there are many reasons why you might want to move to a place like Montana or Arizona, perfectly fine, beautiful states. But if you're doing this merely to access affordable housing, I would argue that's unfair and something we can and should resolve. As a result of this population loss, California is actually losing congressional representation for the first time in state history. California is having less and less relevance at the national level simply because we priced out so many of our most vulnerable residents. Okay, so is everybody sufficiently depressed? I hope not. Good news in a certain sense is that this crisis is a policy choice. So Teri talked about some of these numbers, but I'll reiterate. The reason for the California housing crisis, of course, there's many factors, but the root cause of this is a significant housing shortage that's decades in the making. You can see that over the past 30 years, housing permitting has almost entirely dropped off. The rental vacancy rate in California is incredibly low. So, as with jobs, right, when you're applying for jobs, you want a lot of different employers competing for you. When you're trying to sell something on Facebook Market, you want a lot of different buyers, so you can bid up folks one against the other. It's the same as true in housing. When you're looking for an apartment, you ideally want lots of options so you can find the deal that's perfect for you and drive rents down. In California, because we have such a low rental vacancy rate, it strengthens the power of landlords and weakens the power of tenants and results in ever-rising rents. To stress this permitting point, here's a comparison of units, permits issued per 1,000 residents per year over the past few decades, over the past 40 years. And you can see Florida and Texas, places that certainly did have temporary run-ups in housing prices, but saw a big surge in new housing construction and are now seeing rents fall. They permit at a pretty healthy, steady rate. California, one of the most prosperous, wealthy, sustainable places on planet Earth, we permit housing closer to two of the poorest states and states that are permanently losing population. This is strange, right? We would expect that California would be a place where a lot of folks want to move and are moving to, and they're trying, but because of our affordable housing crisis, trends are going in the opposite direction. So our theory is there are three different factors here. The first is zoning. So zoning is a system of citywide rules that say for every single parcel in every single city in California, we designate the allowed land use and the allowed density. And now some of this is reasonable, right, for certain nuisance uses, right, factories, industrial, but the system that we have goes so far beyond that and has made it effectively illegal to build a lot of the housing that our cities need. So this is a chart of zone capacity of Los Angeles compared to actual population since 1960. Over the course of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we dramatically tightened our zoning, made our zoning much more restrictive, such that now the actual zone capacity or the housing can be built is barely above what the actual population is. And so we've put ourselves in a case where we have a permanent housing shortage because it's simply illegal to build additional housing in cities like Los Angeles and cities all across California. So here's a map of this is the metropolitan Los Angeles, aka the Southern California Association of Governments, if you like planning jargon like me. Anything in this map that's either pink or light blue, if you're colorblind, the pink will show up as the darker shade and the light blue will show up as the lighter shade. If it's either color, this is an area where our zoning rules say some form of housing is legal to build. But in the darker areas or the pink areas, those are areas where the local zoning says the only form of housing that's legal to build is a detached single-family home. And that wasn't so much of a problem decades ago, right? When we had more land within easy commutes of downtown that we could just turn into more single-family homes. But today, that effectively places a high price floor on the price of housing and blocks a whole bunch of traditional typologies that once made cities like Los Angeles more affordable. I just watched The Big Lebowski last night with a good friend, right? Jeffrey Lebowski lives in the dude lives in a cottage court, right? Doesn't evidently have a job, has no struggle making rent, right? That was a traditional form of housing today, or in decades past. I looked it up today that actual one-bedroom cottage court condo that he lives in sold for $1.4 million a few years ago. So the dude has probably moved to Las Vegas or Phoenix by this point. In any case, these typologies have been made illegal to build. You cannot build the duplexes, the small apartment buildings, the townhouses, precisely the types of space-efficient, small housing that kept our neighborhoods affordable and diverse historically. I would stress this because I think this is a really, really important and indispensable part of the story. A lot of these rules, too, are tied with explicit efforts to segregate our cities. So this is not necessarily an accident when I say we're making less and less progress on segregation. In many cases, this is a result of zoning policies that explicitly aimed to segregate our cities. Modern zoning in California, as across the country, emerges in the aftermath of the Buchanan v. Worley decision in 1917, where the Supreme Court banned explicitly racial zoning. But in the years after that, what cities start to realize is, well, we can't mention race, but if we can zone our cities on the basis of class, by saying if you want to live in this neighborhood, you have to be able to afford a certain type of home, you can achieve a form of segregation that's even more robust than what they've been trying to build before. The ability to determine what gets built where is the ability to determine who gets to live where. And this is partly why cities like Los Angeles, partly why regions like the Bay Area, partly why regions like the Capital Region or San Diego, all across the state, remain far more segregated than I think we would call for from our stated values. This is a pairing of yard signs. This particular pairing is from Austin, Texas. So on the left, you have these signs that started to crop up in the era of Trump, right? Nothing wrong with it. Very nice sentiment. No matter who you are, we're glad you're our neighbor. You start seeing these alongside the all are welcome here signs. I think it's a very nice sentiment and definitely a welcome reaction to some of the hateful rhetoric. But then to the right is a sign opposing zoning changes that would have allowed for a more affordable mixture of housing units to be built. And I think folks don't reckon with the contradiction between their stated values and the actual policies that they support when it comes to things like zoning. If we're serious about the fact that no matter who you are, we're glad you're our neighbor, we should be supporting more of a mixture of housing. In addition to the zoning rules often making housing illegal to build, when housing is legal to build, it often just takes a really long time to get entitled and permitted. So entitled, to spare you all the planning jargon as much as possible, entitled means the planning department signed off on you. Permitting means you've complied with the building code and you're good to go and can start building. This is the average for a range of different types of units. And you can see if you want to build a detached single family home, Doesn't take too long, probably takes a little bit longer than it should. If you want to build an ADU, because of state laws that I'll talk about in a minute, it doesn't take too long. But if you want to build an apartment building, it's going to take at least a year to get entitled and permitted. And that's all paperwork. That's not even improvements necessarily on the project. And that's the average. If you're trying to build, particularly in a high opportunity area or a larger building, can easily take in excess of 2 years. We have a crisis now. Part of why our permitting system is so chaotic is that, unlike the original idea of zoning, which was if you follow the rules, you check the boxes, you get your permit without much fuss. Today, because our zoning is so restrictive and involves so many what are called discretionary approvals, now every new housing project entails multiple public hearings. It entails a giant environmental review. It opens you up to litigation. And we know that what ends up happening with this system is that more affluent communities with access to jobs and high opportunity areas, places with access to schools, leverage the system to block housing. And that shifts a lot of the housing burden onto lower income communities. And for projects that can still hack it, it takes a long, long time. This is the NIMBY phenomenon. I mentioned CEQA, and I think CEQA gets beat up on quite a lot in California. I don't think it's the only problem. I think it's a symptom of a problem. But because so many projects in California today end up becoming discretionary, they have to undertake a long, extensive environmental review. And that might be appropriate for things like, a new energy project or a new road or something of that nature. We might want to do some environmental review. That seems reasonable. But if you're building an apartment building near a transit station, I think we can pretty reliably say what the environmental impact is going to be. It's going to be good. And yet we subject these projects to endless reviews and litigation, often by actors who are acting in bad faith with no real concern for the environment. So I talked about the zoning constraints that block housing from getting built. I talked about the permitting that delays housing that we do allow to be built. But the third aspect of this is cost. It's just a lot more expensive to build in California. And so this bar chart here is a chart of the, I believe it's the average impact fee assessed of new housing. And you can see California is this extreme outlier. We charge incredibly high impact fees. And that's all cost that goes right into the cost of a brand new home. So another way to illustrate this is a map from 2012, and I'm sorry to say it's probably only gotten much worse since then. In fact, we know it's only gotten much worse since then. Again, California is an extreme outlier in charging these very, very high fees that price many families out altogether. Besides explicit fees like impact fees, we also have a lot of mandates that can make housing more expensive. So for example, if you want to build housing in many parts of California, not near transit, thanks to some of the laws we passed, but in many parts of California, you cannot legally build housing without building parking. And now, of course, many households might want parking. They might place a really high premium on it. They would only want to rent a unit with parking. But many households, maybe certainly retirees, households that walk or bike to work, they might prefer to have a cheaper unit without a parking spot. If you have a 2-bedroom unit that's 675 square feet and you require 2 parking spaces or maybe 1 parking space per bedroom, that can increase the cost of that unit by $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, depending on if you have to do excavation work or structured parking. Again, some households might prefer that. They might be happy to pay that cost, but in many cases, the rules we have on the books don't allow them to make that trade-off. This especially makes it difficult to adaptively reuse historic properties, where they're reusing one of these properties might require you to demolish the other to build a parking lot. I would say that's probably not very good for the health of that street. And they're often just somewhat absurd, right? So here on the right is a standard list of parking requirements from a certain city. And you can see a tavern or a pub, 10 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet, small bar, 12 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet, and a bar, club, or lounge, 14 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. If you know what the difference is between those 3 uses, you might make a good land use hearing. In any case, all 3 of these uses exist to get people drunk into a state where they should not be driving. And yet we mandate huge amounts of off-street parking that increase the cost of everything. So the really good news, if that was kind of good news, we kind of know how to solve the crisis. We know it's a crisis of our own making, but the really good news is it's a crisis that we know how to end. That have inspired us and inform our efforts. Minneapolis made headlines in 2019 by being the first major American city to eliminate single-family zoning. That was that policy I talked about with respect to Los Angeles, where we say in 75 to 90% of our cities, the only form of housing you can build is a detached single-family home. They got rid of that and they said, you can build low-rise, inoffensive, apartment buildings and townhouses citywide. And along our transit-rich corridors, we're going to allow for maybe those tired strip malls and office parks that are never going to be reused in an age of remote work to turn into apartments over shops, a very traditional form of development that built some of our best communities today. And when I say missing middle, it's that middle of housing between the detached single-family home and the larger apartment building. Those types of homes that once kept our cities affordable and integrated, and a place where you could grow and change, and at different stages of your life have different forms of housing that meet your needs. Things like duplexes, courtyard apartments, townhouses, small apartment buildings, live-work units. Minneapolis, notably, the proof is in the pudding. Since they made a lot of these changes over the past few years, they've actually been one of the only cities among their peer group to actually make significant progress, not only seeing rents stabilize, but actually fall in real terms relative to peers. And we're seeing this actually when you look at California cities that have taken the housing crisis seriously and are building a lot of housing, they actually post pretty similar positive outcomes. Something we've done on this front in California that I think is really exciting is legalizing accessory dwelling units, aka granny flats or mother-in-law units, casitas here in LA. These are small additional apartments that might go in an unused garage or basement or attic. And in 2016, policymakers said, hey, we're going to set a workable statewide framework and guarantee the right of every homeowner in California to build an ADU. And what we've seen is over 80,000 new ADUs permitted and many thousands built since then. This was a form of housing that was altogether illegal to build in the vast majority of neighborhoods until quite recently. And we changed some small rules and we've unlocked this huge new supply of housing. And again, we talk in terms of numbers, but every one of these ADUs that gets built is maybe somebody who can afford to retire in their home and rent out their ADU and have additional income. Maybe it's a young couple who want to bring their parents to live near them, or an aging couple who want to have their young adult children nearby who aren't able to afford a home without having to move away to Nevada or Utah. They can stay locally, or even just new forms of affordable housing in neighborhoods that historically haven't built any housing at all. We've done a few things of this nature. For example, AB 2011 liberalized rules controlling apartments over shops along our major corridors. And hopefully we're going to see that law start to take effect. Laws like SB 9, where we still have to iron out some of the kinks and make this work, but allowing duplexes and small lot homes in residential areas. As far as that permitting process or those delays, a really, really exciting thing that's happened right here in Los Angeles over the last couple of years is Mayor Bass enacting Executive Directive 1, massively streamlining the permitting process for 100% workforce and affordable housing, right? We didn't even have to change the zoning rules. This was simply, hey, we're going to get these projects through the process much quicker. And when you combine that with state density bonus that provides additional density for projects that have affordable units, this has already facilitated something like over 10,000 units. I have to keep updating this number because every time I hear from my colleagues in the mayor's office, the number just keeps going up. And all it took was a more thoughtful approach to getting these projects through and saying, hey, look, we have a crisis now. We need to act. We need to deal with some of these delays. A version of this at the state level was SB 35 that, again, said if this project's got an affordable component and it's built with certain labor protections, let's get it through the permitting process. And what we saw with that was, again, I believe about 18,000 units permitted. I'm excited to say that we made that law permanent and beefed it up last year with SB 423. Or wonkier laws like SB 330, which tighten the actual permitting process, limiting the ability for bad faith jurisdictions to infinitely delay projects or jerk them around. It's wonky stuff, but it really, really matters, certainly if you talk to folks who are building affordable housing. In terms of the cost thing, we're seeing a lot of movement on a lot of different margins. There are a lot of bills in the session this year on impact fees, partly because of the Sheets versus County of El Dorado decision. But we've also made a lot of progress on removing parking requirements, especially in places where they make the least sense. So Buffalo made history in 2017 by being the first city to scrap these altogether, and they were trying to encourage adaptive reuse and infill. And the idea here is to let consumers decide. Here you can see, I'll move through some of this quickly so we can get to Q&A. But this reform has totally taken off, and we've seen a lot of California cities altogether remove these rules. We've done a whole bunch of things toward this end, removing parking requirements within a half-mile transit, encourage novel forms of building, point access blocks that will allow for more family-sized units, getting impact fees under control, but there's still a lot of exciting work to be done. I'll make a couple points in closing here. The first is that these zoning and permitting and cost reforms, they're necessary, but they're not sufficient. Even in a context where we have a lot of new housing being built, we have to make sure that there's a steady supply of deed-restricted affordable housing. So housing that's reserved for folks at lower incomes. There's no free lunch here. That's partly why we support things like ACA 1, which will increase the bonding power of local governments, or partly why we support efforts to experiment with new approaches to constructing social housing in California. Of course, if you keep throwing money at the problem and you're not building more housing overall, it's probably not going to help that much. But if you do both at the same time, we really can end the California housing crisis in our lifetime. In addition, we need thoughtful interventions to protect quality of life. So, density creates new challenges. We need to make more thoughtful policy concerning safer streets. We need to invest in better transit. We need more thoughtful parking management. When you ask people, what are your concerns about new growth? The two things they say are traffic and parking. Those are issues that we actually can solve with thoughtful interventions. So what can you do? The folks on this call have a huge amount of power, and I'm flattered for you to tune in. But what can you do if you're moved by this? The first is connect with us at California YIMBY. Our goal is to be your housing voice in Sacramento. We sponsor and move bills. We do the research. We do the outreach to hopefully get some of this stuff through. Get involved with your local YIMBY chapters. In many cases, there's likely a passionate group of reformers already in your community who would probably love to have you join. Work with your local elected officials and planners. Work with them to understand some of these barriers and what can be done about it, and point them, if you can, to examples of other cities that are doing great things. And then, of course, we need folks to actually leverage these new laws and build the housing. Show policymakers that we actually can build housing if we can get some of these rules right. With that, again, I'm honored to be able to speak to you, and I really look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nolan. That was very interesting. I will get us started with some of our questions. So the first, it's two I'm kind of binding into one from Mary. So she notes on the fact that you touched on, Nolan, that California is losing population and our fertility rate is not at the replacement rate. And so how is the 2.5 million homes, like who is it housing, and how many folks would actually that many units house?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Mary. So we know why people are leaving California, and they're leaving California because of the affordability issue. Folks are not leaving California because of our great weather or our amazing job market or our incredible schools. They're leaving California because it's the only choice they have to be able to afford a decent home. And so if we want to turn that trend around and make California an affordable place where folks can, if they're from here, where they can stay, or where folks from places with less opportunity can come, we have to build that housing. I think a lot of folks point to the recent population decline and say, look, population decline, we don't have to do anything about the housing. I'm not suggesting you're saying that, but you do occasionally hear it. I would say it's actually a symptom of a crisis. Many people would like to live here and move here, and we should make space for them. Thank you for the question.
Great. The next one is from Mary. So given California's budget crisis, where can cities find subsidy funding for low-income projects that aren't attractive to market pricing?
Sure, I can take that. I don't want Teri, if you want to hop in, you're welcome. But I'll take a first whack at it. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit here, right? And so, for example, here in Los Angeles, what we've done is we've said, okay, if you have an affordable component to your project, policies like TOC will give you extra density. We'll get your permit process through the bureaucracy quicker, right? Those are really zero cost interventions that are unlocking tens, potentially hundreds of thousands of units across the state. So just making the process as easy as possible, because market rents are so high right now. The cross subsidy actually works to a certain extent. That might not always be true, but right now it is. And if you can say, hey, we'll give you extra density, we'll get you through the permitting process quickly, you can unlock a lot of affordable supply without public support. That said, absolutely, we continue to fight for this. We think that this should be a priority, even in a context of austerity, because this is the #1 issue facing Californians. When you survey Californians, the #1 quality of life issue they raise is housing affordability, and we think that should be reflected in our budgets.
I agree, Nolan. Thank you so much for that. Actually, Mary has another question, and I'll also just promote to anyone, if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. So Mary's other question is, what is your opinion of HCD allowing flexibility of trading housing units among cities within an MPO like Sandag in San Diego County?
Yeah, that's a great question and very in the weeds, whipping out the acronyms. I love it. Yeah, so I would suggest that ending the California housing crisis involves every city doing its fair share. And, of course, there's something to be said for, well, let's trade our requirement to some other city and they'll build it. But in many cases, what you have are higher opportunity, wealthier cities trading away their requirement. At least when I witnessed this happening in New Jersey, which has a similar fair share mechanism, this was often wealthier jurisdictions trying to get out of building their fair share. And I would say, of course, we have to build housing, but we have to build it equitably, and part of that means everybody building their fair share. So I would look with some skepticism at trading housing allocations.
Yeah, because I think on top of that, when you're trading, that doesn't mean that you're gonna probably have people moving further away from where their job is, and so they're going to be adding miles probably on their car, which they can't afford, and if it breaks down, then it's there's just so many. Ideally, you would want people to be within a half an hour of where they work, and at that, you'd even want them to be on transit getting to work and maybe walking the last couple miles. That doesn't work for everyone, but that would be the ideal to help the environment as well as build our communities.
Great. That was actually something I hadn't heard of, so I'm gonna have to look into that. I also love the acronyms. So let's see. Somewhat anonymous question asked, do developers pay extra to avoid increasing low-income housing?
So if some jurisdictions have a policy called inclusionary zoning, and the details vary a lot, but this is, for those who don't know, it's essentially a policy saying if you want to build a new apartment building, some share of the units have to be reserved at rents well below the market rate. And so if I understand, the question is, occasionally these programs allow you to pay a fee into a housing trust fund rather than actually build the units. And that might be more workable for smaller projects where actually having an affordability component might be difficult, or a smaller developer who might not have the in-house capacity to manage those units. I don't know that they would pay extra, though. It's supposed to be a fee that's commensurate to the cost of actually building the unit.
Great. Another question. So another anonymous asker was asking how to address the policy of, they said the Coastal Commission allows Airbnbs in their town and they're taking over single family homes that could be housing for families. And how to reevaluate policies like that.
I'm going to let you go, but I will say that I know that there's some legislation that's come up this year that is trying to manage the, when people buy a second home, or if they use it as a business, change some of that, the structure that makes that very attractive right now to make it less attractive. But in terms of specifics, Nolan, do you know of anything?
Yeah, so as I understand, jurisdictions retain the power to regulate Airbnbs and set rules around that. And certainly that might be an appropriate and necessary measure in some of these places with a lot of tourism. Certainly, I would say it'd be case by case. And I would say on the other end, a lot of these coastal communities have to be making sure that they're building, certainly their workforce housing. I was up in a small coastal community in Northern California recently, and you talk to anybody who waits tables or bartends or works in a hospital or works in the public sector in those communities, and they're driving 2-3 hours. So of course, getting short-term rentals under control can be appropriate in some contexts, but you also got to be taking other measures to get workforce housing built.
Great. Thank you guys for rapid fire answering these as well. From our net, we have kind of a two-part question. So have any builder's remedy projects been approved in California? And then also, if a city doesn't meet their RHNA numbers or their housing element isn't certified, does the builder's remedy automatically go into effect?
Do you know, did the one in La Cañada, Flint Ridge, was that a builder's remedy project, the one that was for senior housing?
So as I understand, the court decision there was that the project at least had to proceed. So they were not letting the applicant file. I love how deeply in the weeds we are. It's a real testament to the league that we're getting. These are great questions, by the way. To my knowledge, if you mean approved, has there been a builder's remedy project that's been fully entitled and permitted? To my knowledge, there has not. I do know a local context, Santa Monica signed a memorandum of understanding or some form of agreement with some of these builders remedy projects. So they will be proceeding. It'll probably take the standard time. But to actual question, entitled and permitted? No, not yet. To my knowledge, it's not. We have a gentleman on our team who specializes in that. To your second question, so if you are not on track to meet your RHNA goals, that does not decertify your housing element, so that doesn't make you at risk of builder's remedy projects, but it might mean that other laws kick in. So for example, SB 423, one of those laws I mentioned that said, hey, you have to permit these projects ministerially and promptly. That only kicks in if a jurisdiction is behind on their RHNA numbers. And that doesn't mean that they subvert zoning. They still have to adhere to the zoning, but they just have to be entitled and permitted in a ministerial and predictable and prompt way. That does kick in if you're not meeting RHNA goals, but not the builder's remedy. Thank you for the questions.
Great. Yeah. If there's anything leaguers are, it is policy wonks. So this is not surprising for our questions. I'll give us one more question just as we're reaching 6 p.m. to be respectful of everyone's time. This is for Nolan. What bills is California YIMBY sponsoring this year, and what are some priorities?
Yeah, thanks so much. So we have probably our largest package yet because there's just so much appetite for this issue. I would encourage you to go to our website. It's CAYIMBY, CAYIMBY.org. And if you click the legislation tab, you can see our full list. We have a lot of really exciting bills to bring a little bit more certainty to impact fees, to hopefully make it easier to build homeownership opportunities and to streamline some of those processes. And a whole bunch of other just fun things. So check it out. Go to our website and don't hesitate to shoot me an email if you have any questions about anything or have any ideas.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for our attendees this evening. A recording and slides will be available next week. And yeah, thank you both so much. That was really great to hear from you. And have a lovely evening.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.